We talked earlier this year on an Oklahoma gardening show, I think probably back in late spring or early summer, about establishing some ground covers such as ajuga and periwinkle and English ivy and several of the others through the purchase of small plants from a nursery or a larger plant where you can divide and just simply set those out in a pattern to get you a good ground cover. But I want to give you some ideas and tips today on how you can establish ground covers in a different fashion at this time of the year and really get a pretty quick cover in an area that may be a place where you want to establish a ground cover with relatively some simple techniques. Now, what I'm going to be talking about is how to establish such vining ground covers as English ivy, vinca, both vinca major and vinca minor, which is the big leaf and the small leaf vinca, and also pachysandra, and maybe some of these other trailing ground covers such as that. But you'll want to do this in a shady location, and perhaps you've got a large oak tree or pine tree or a shady location in your garden where grass simply will not grow, and it's very evident this time of the year that grass won't grow well there, and you do want to establish this ground cover. One of the very important things, and probably the key to establishing this ground cover right now, is good soil preparation. The soil needs to be high in organic matter, needs to be friable, and it needs to be very moist. So what you will want to do is, if there's a lot of residue underneath the tree or in the shady area where you're going to be establishing this, is rake all that residue out. Maybe there's pine needles there, or bark, or leaves, or twigs, maybe dead grass where your grass simply hasn't made it. But rake all that residue back to expose the soil so you can get a good idea of what type of soil you've got there to work with. As I mentioned, the soil does need to be moist. So a couple of days before you're going to proceed with putting your ground covers in, then soak that soil real thoroughly so that you've got it soaked to a depth of at least 6 to 8 inches. You may want to set a sprinkler out there or a soaker hose and water it for a few hours at a time for 2 or 3 days, just to be sure that you've got that soil good and moist. Then check the condition of your soil and see if it's a heavy clay soil or if you've got adequate organic matter or not. If you don't have a good organic matter base in that soil, then you want to work in compost or peat moss or something in there that will give it good drainage and good aeration and make for a good organic matter filled soil. Also, if you have a very high clay content or a tight soil, you may want to put about an inch of sand over the top of it and work that sand in well just to improve drainage. But after you've got your soil worked well, and you know that it's loose and that it's friable and that it's moistened well, then you can proceed with establishing these ground covers. And I'm going to be planting some English ivy today, but as I mentioned, these other ground covers such as vinca major and minor and pachysandra also work quite well in this area. So in the area where you want to put these, with a hoe, make some shallow furrows, about a 1/2 to 3/4 inch deep, 4 to 6 inches apart. Now, of course, you're going to have a supply of the ground cover that you want to put in here, but I know many of us already have some of these ground covers around the landscape, and what we're wanting to do is perhaps just establish a new planting, or you may have a friend or a neighbor that has some that you could talk to them and maybe barter a little bit and go over and thin theirs out. But cut several long strands of the ground cover that you're wanting to put in there, such as this, and lay the plant in the furrow, covering the stem slightly, but leaving the leaves exposed. What you're going to be doing is putting this stem into very close, intimate contact with the soil, and you may already see that on some of these you've got little tiny roots that are trying to grow. They simply have not been able to take off yet. Well, you're giving them ideal locations and conditions here for those roots to go ahead and develop. So slightly cover the stem portion of this, but leave, as I said, the leaves exposed, and what that's going to do is allow those leaves to go ahead and go through the process of photosynthesis, be exposed to the light, while at the same time the stem itself will be in intimate contact with the soil, where you may be able to get some pretty rapid initiation of roots there. So you can see already that just by filling in like this, we're going to have, once these get started, a pretty close row here of the plant. So it's not going to take those plants long to go ahead and become established and begin to grow and spread and cover that area. Now, this is a time of the year that's generally slow for most of you gardeners, unless you're really involved in getting ready for the fall garden, and a lot of the things are now just sort of in a maintenance stage, so you may have a little bit more time than you would in the spring to do a project like this. And I know many of the gardeners around the state, as I visit with them, talk about the problems they have underneath shade trees and in various locations where they want to get a cover established such as this. Well, now is really a good time to do that. Well, once you've got these in the soil, we want to very quickly water them. And so with a soaker hose or a nozzle that lets out a very light, fine spray, just lightly water those down good to again water that soil onto that stem, not very hard so that you wash the soil away. And in fact, in one area or two, I see here where I have washed the soil away a little bit because I didn't get it packed the way I should. So I'm going to come back in and cover that over again so that stem is hidden, but again the leaves are exposed. Once I have those soaked down good, I'll come in about every 3 or 4 days and water them again real well like this, and continue to do that at least until I know that these have become established and I start seeing some new growth. And then I can just pretty well give very minimum maintenance to them. And I would expect that by fall, I will have pretty good growth on these already and have a good crown cover already started. And certainly by late spring and early summer, when these come out again, I'll have a pretty good cover underneath this tree.
We hope you've enjoyed this classic from the Oklahoma Gardening Vault. Remember, even though these tips and techniques are timeless, there's always something new to learn in the world of gardening. By subscribing to both Oklahoma Gardening and OK Gardening Classics, you'll have access to a wealth of gardening knowledge, both classic and contemporary.